Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My name is Reggie Harris. I am 34 years old, and I build custom kitchen cabinets and furniture in Houston, Texas. I was finishing up a custom kitchen cabinet job on the west side when my phone rang. It was my fiancée, Keisha, calling to ask if I wanted to meet her and her friends for dinner at some upscale place downtown. After 10 hours of precision cuts, leveling, and installations, I was not exactly dressed for fine dining, but she insisted. She said it would be fun, that her girls wanted to see me, that I should not worry about what I was wearing. I hesitated for a second, looking down at my clean but worn work boots and faded jeans, and my stomach tightened. Something in me told me to pass, to go home, shower, and rest. I pushed that feeling aside and told her I would be there. I pulled up to this trendy restaurant downtown, where everything looked like it cost twice what it should, from the lighting fixtures to the tiny plates they called appetizers. I walked in still in my work clothes, clean, but clearly dressed like a man who works with his hands for a living. The hostess gave me that look, the quick up and down scan, like she was wondering if I was lost or delivering something. When I told her I had reservations under Keisha's name, her expression shifted into professional politeness, and she led me through the crowded dining room to a corner table where my fiancée sat with 3 of her friends. Their conversation was flowing when I walked up, full of laughter and clinking glasses, but stopped dead when they saw me. Keisha looked embarrassed. Not the good kind of embarrassed, like when your man shows up unexpectedly with flowers, but the kind where you wish he had not shown up at all. Her eyes flicked over my boots, then to her friends, then back to me. I pulled out a chair and sat down. I said, "Sorry I am late. I had to finish installing those cherrywood cabinets for the Jefferson family. They want everything perfect for their anniversary party tomorrow." One of her friends, a woman named Crystal who worked at some marketing firm, barely looked up from her phone. She said, "That is nice," in a flat tone before going right back to whatever she was scrolling. The energy at that table fell off from the start. They were smiling, but it was tight. Their laughter sounded forced, like they had been having a different kind of conversation before I walked in, and were not sure how to pick it back up. I have been around enough people in enough houses to know when something is wrong. Clients try to hide arguments, tension, or stress, but it hangs in the air. That same feeling sat between me and those women. I try to brush it off. I ordered a beer, listened to them talk about work, social media, and some co-workers' destination wedding in Miami, and answer questions when Keisha tossed one my way, but it felt like I was a guest appearance on a show that had not really invited me. At some point, I excused myself to go to the restroom. On the way back, I heard voices carrying from around the corner, near the hallway leading to the bathrooms. The acoustics in that place bounced sound farther than the speakers realized. I recognized Keisha's voice and the voices of her friends. They thought I was still washing my hands. I slowed my steps when I heard my name. Crystal said, "Honestly, Keisha, you could do so much better. I mean, he is sweet and all, but he is not exactly impressive, is he? You are young. You are beautiful. You should be aiming higher." Another friend murmured agreement. Crystal continued, "I'm just saying, do you really want to spend your life with someone who, well, works with wood?" The way she said "works with wood" made it sound like an insult, like I was beneath them. My fiancée's voice was softer, but I heard her clearly when she said, "Sometimes I wonder if you all are right. Maybe I am settling." I stood there for about 10 seconds, letting that sink in like a slow punch. $38 an hour building custom furniture, renovating homes, running my own business, putting money aside for our future, planning a life with her, and I was apparently not impressive enough. To her friends, I was a man in work boots, a man with calloused hands, and a truck instead of a luxury sedan. To Keisha, I was something she might be settling for. The words stung because they were not said in anger. They were casual, like she had thought them many times before. I walked back to the table and sat down like nothing had happened. I ordered another beer, made small talk about the weather, the Astros, and a new brunch place downtown that one of them would not stop praising. I smiled when it seemed appropriate. I listened to their stories and nodded in the right places. On the surface, everything looked the same, but something inside me had shifted, and I knew it was not shifting back. After the waiter walked away, I looked directly at Keisha and said, "So, what do you think about aiming higher?" The color drained from her face so fast it was almost visible. She said, "What do you mean?" I held her gaze. "I mean, if you think you're settling, maybe you should stop settling." Her friends went very quiet. The clinking of glasses and hum of the restaurant faded to a dull blur behind us. Keisha said, "Reggie, I do not know what you are talking about." I said, "I think you do." I finished my beer in 3 slow swallows and put $20 on the table, even though I knew it did not cover the full tab. I said, "But that is fine. Consider yourself free to aim as high as you want." I stood up. My chair scraped the floor louder than I expected. I looked at each of her friends one by one, then back at her. I said, "The ring is in my truck. Do you want it back?" Keisha's eyes widened, and her voice jumped an octave. "Wait, what are you doing?" I said, "What I should have done the moment you decided I was not good enough." I pulled out my truck keys and held them loosely. "You can get the ring now, or I can drop it off tomorrow. Your choice." I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard chairs scraping and hurried footsteps. Keisha followed me outside, her friends trailing behind like they were watching a car accident they could not look away from. The night air felt cooler than it had when I arrived, or maybe that was just the adrenaline. My truck sat under a streetlight at the edge of the lot. I unlocked it, opened the glove compartment, and pulled out the ring box I had saved 6 months to pay for. I turned and held it out to her. I said, "Here, go find someone more impressive." Her hands were shaking as she stared at the box. She said, "You are being unreasonable." I never said anything about. I cut her off. "You did not have to say it to me. You said it to them." I nodded toward her friends, who were standing a few yards away, suddenly awfully interested in the sidewalk. "And that tells me everything I need to know about what you actually think." For a moment, I saw panic flicker across her face, like she realized the ground had just shifted beneath her feet. She took the ring with trembling fingers. She said, "We could talk about this. We can work through this. You are overreacting because you heard one piece of a conversation." I shook my head. "No, we cannot. Because now I know who I was planning to marry, and it is not someone I want to marry." I walked around her, opened my truck door, and climbed in. In the rearview mirror, I could see Keisha standing there with her friends, holding the ring box like she could not figure out what had just happened. But I knew exactly what had happened. I had just saved myself from a lifetime of not being good enough for someone who was never good enough for me. I drove home on autopilot, my mind running through every conversation we had ever had about the future, the house we would buy, the kids she had said she wanted someday. The way she used to say my work ethic was one of the things she loved about me. It all fell hollow now. The first thing I did when I parked in my driveway was sit in the dark cab of my truck for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel, breathing slowly until the tightness in my chest eased. Then I went inside, grabbed a pen and the wedding folder from the kitchen drawer, and started making calls. The venue manager at Bayou Oaks Event Center picked up on the third ring. It was almost 9 in the evening, but they handled events every weekend, so someone was always on duty. He said, "Bayou Oaks Event Center, this is Mr. Bishop speaking." I said, "Good evening, sir. This is about the Harris Robinson wedding reservation for next month. I need to cancel everything." His tone shifted from cheerful to careful. He said, "I am sorry to hear that. May I have the booking reference?" I gave him the details, listened to the clicking of keys as he pulled up our file, then silence for a moment. He cleared his throat and said, "Sir, I have to inform you that canceling this close to the date means forfeiting the deposit. That is $3,500. I said, "I understand. Cancel it anyway." He hesitated. "Are you sure? Sometimes couples reconsider. Perhaps you would like to discuss this with your fiancée first." I said calmly, "There is no fiancée. Please cancel everything." There was another pause. Then he said quietly, "Understood. I will process the cancellation right now. I am genuinely sorry it did not work out for you." I thanked him and hung up. By midnight, I had made 8 phone calls. The caterer, who tried to sound sympathetic, but mostly sounded disappointed about the lost full booking. The photographer, a man named Gerald who specialized in weddings and family portraits. The florist, a woman who kept saying, "Oh no, honey," every few sentences. The disc jockey, who had just loaded our playlist into his system. Even Pastor Green at New Hope Baptist Church, who had agreed to officiate the ceremony. Each conversation was the same. Yes, I understood about the deposits. Yes, I knew I would not get most of that money back. Yes, I was certain. No, I did not want to reschedule. Gerald, the photographer, actually tried hardest to talk me out of it. He said, "Look, man, I have seen couples have cold feet before. By the time the rehearsal comes around, they are laughing about it. Maybe sleep on this and call me tomorrow. I can hold your date for 24 hours." I said, "It is not cold feet. The engagement is over. I need the date available for someone else." There was a short silence. Then he said, "All right. I respect that. For what it is worth, I hope you end up with someone who sees your value." I said, "That is the plan," and thanked him before hanging up. Better, I thought as I looked at the stack of contracts, than losing a lifetime. Around 11:30, while I was putting the binder of canceled contracts back into the drawer, my phone started buzzing over and over. Text after text from Keisha lit up the screen, followed by calls. "Can we talk? Please answer. You misunderstood." The phone vibrated nonstop. I set it face down on the counter, then finally turned it off altogether. I was done listening to her voice. I was not interested in explanations that should have never been necessary in the first place. Saturday morning, after a few hours of restless sleep, I drove to Harper & Sons Jewelers where I had bought the engagement ring. The bell above the door chimed when I walked in. The same salesman who had helped me pick it out 6 months ago, a middle-aged man named Mr. Harper, looked up and smiled automatically. He said, "Back so soon? Do not tell me you need a bigger diamond already." I placed the ring box on the counter between us. I said, "I need to return this." His smile faded. He opened the box, examined the ring carefully, and his expression softened with understanding. He said, "I am truly sorry to hear that. Our policy for rings is typically store credit within a certain time frame. However, given that this is in perfect condition and you purchased it less than a year ago, I can offer you 70% of what you paid as a refund." I said, "That works." While he processed the return, he made polite, awkward conversation about how these things happen and how it is better to figure things out before the wedding day. I nodded, but did not really respond. A few minutes later, I walked out with a check for $2,100 and no ring. Next stop was the bank. I had added Keisha to my savings account 3 months ago when we started paying deposits and planning the wedding. That was getting changed immediately. The banker, a professional woman named Helen, led me to her desk and asked how she could help. I explained that I needed to remove a secondary account holder and change the account number. She looked at the screen, then at me, and said gently, "I'm sorry you are dealing with this. We can certainly take care of it." She typed for a while, then said, "I will need to remove the secondary account holder and issue you a new account number. The funds will be transferred into the new account by the end of the business day. You will also receive new debit cards in the mail." I said, "Perfect. Just to confirm, this means she will no longer have access to any of these funds or any account information." Helen nodded. "That is correct. Once this is finalized, she will not be connected to your accounts in any way." I signed where I needed to sign, thanked her, and walked out feeling lighter. By Sunday evening, I had methodically erased every trace of our wedding plans. No drama on social media, no long text arguments, no scenes. Just clean, efficient action. The same way I approach my work. Measure, mark, cut, sand, finish. My friend Leon stopped by that Sunday while I was reorganizing my garage, lining up clamps and sorting screws into label containers. He had heard through the grapevine that something had happened. He walked in, looked around, then said, "Man, what is going on? Keisha has been calling everybody asking where you are." I handed him a beer from the mini fridge and said, "We broke up." He blinked. "What? When?" I said, "Friday night." He sat down on my workbench like he needed extra support. He said, "What happened?" I wiped sawdust off my hands and told him. She decided I was not impressive enough. So I decided she was right. Leon stared at me. "That is ridiculous. You two were planning a wedding." I said, "We were." Past tense. Turns out she was settling for me, and I do not want to be someone's backup plan. He shook his head like he was trying to process it. "So you just ended it?" I said, "I ended it, canceled everything, returned the ring, and moved on." Leon looked at the neatly stacked lumber in the corner, then back at me like he could not believe how calm I sounded. He said, "Man, do you not want to fight for it? Talk it through. At least hear her out." I took a long drink of my beer and said, "Fight for what?" "The privilege of spending my life with someone who thinks I am not good enough." He opened his mouth, then closed it. I continued. I have more self-respect than that. A little later, after he had gone quiet for a stretch, my phone buzzed on the workbench. I had turned it back on that afternoon. The lock screen showed 47 missed calls and 36 messages, all from Keisha. Leon pointed at it. She's been trying to reach you. I said, I'm sure she has. He said, are you going to call her back? I said, why would I do that? Leon said, because maybe she wants to apologize. Maybe she realizes she made a mistake now. I looked at him steadily and asked, if your girlfriend told her friends you were not impressive and she should aim higher, would an apology fix that for you? He thought about it for a moment, then said no, probably not. I said, then you understand why I'm not calling her back. That night, sometime after dark, Keisha showed up at my door. I saw her through the window, standing on my porch in a dress I had never seen before, hair styled, makeup flawless, looking like she was going to a job interview. She knocked for 10 minutes straight, then started calling my name. She said, I know you are in there. Your truck is right there. I could hear the frustration creeping in her voice. I stayed in my kitchen, drinking coffee and reading the specs for a new project. Custom built-ins for a law office downtown. Good money. The kind of project that required focus, careful measuring, and an eye for detail. Everything I had plenty of now that I was not pouring energy into a relationship that did not value me. Eventually, she stopped knocking. Before she left, she slid a handwritten letter under my door. I let that letter sit there on the floor until Tuesday morning, stepping over it every time I walked in and out. The envelope was white, my name written in her neat handwriting. On Tuesday, I picked it up, turned it over in my hands once, then tore it in half without opening it and dropped it in the trash. Whatever she had to say, I had already heard enough when she thought I was not listening. Silence was the only answer she was going to get from me now. The following week was productive. I finished the Jefferson's kitchen cabinets, making sure every door lined up, every drawer glided smooth, every edge was flawless. I started on a law office project and bid on 3 more jobs. A custom dining room set for a family in the suburbs, 2 sets of built-in bookshelves for a home library in a historic bungalow, and a media console for a couple in Midtown. Staying busy kept my mind clear and my bank account healthy. When my hands were moving, the noise in my head stayed quiet. Leon stopped by again on Thursday evening with updates I had not asked for. He set a 6-pack on the workbench and said, all right, I know you do not want to hear about Keisha, but you probably should hear this. I sighed but nodded for him to continue. He said, she is telling everybody the wedding is just postponed. I raised an eyebrow. Postponed? He said, yeah. She is saying you all had a fight, but you were working through it and just taking some space. I set down the sandpaper I was using. We are not working through anything. There is nothing to work through. Leon said, I know that. You know that. But she has everybody believing you are just being dramatic and will come around. I asked, what is your point? He said, my point is she is not accepting that this is over. She is rewriting the story before people even know what happened. And what if she keeps telling it that way? What if people start thinking you are the one being unreasonable? I looked at him. Leon, do I look like I care what people think? He stared at me for a second and then admitted, no, not really. I said, the record is straight where it matters. I know what happened. She knows what happened. That is all that matters. What I did not know was that Keisha was planning something that would force the issue. The following Saturday, I was on a ladder installing crown molding in that downtown law office when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but answered. Hello. A female voice said, hi, is this Keisha's fiancé? I almost hung up. I said, who is this? She said, this is Lauren. I am one of her bridesmaids. I'm calling about tonight. I said, what about tonight? She said, the bachelorette party. She said you two worked everything out and that the wedding is back on. I stepped down from the ladder and sat on my sawhorses. I said slowly, the wedding is back on. Lauren said, yes. She said you all had a fight, but you're good now, so we're doing the bachelorette party tonight as planned. I said, where? She said, downtown at that new cocktail place, the Magnolia Lounge. She said to invite all the girls because everything is fine now. I stared at the half-installed molding. And when did she tell you this? Lauren said, yesterday. She called everyone and said the wedding is definitely happening and we should go ahead with the party. I rubbed my forehead. Lauren, I need to tell you something. There is no wedding. I called off the engagement 2 weeks ago. Silence. Then she said, "What?" I repeated, "We broke up. I canceled everything. The venue, the catering, the photographer, the florist, the church. There is no wedding happening." Lauren whispered, but she said, "She showed us the ring again. She told us everything was back on." I said, "She still has the ring because she refused to return it at first. But we are not getting married." Lauren let out a long breath. "Oh my God. She has been planning this whole party, telling everyone to come, saying you two are better than ever." I said, "Well, we are not. What you do about tonight is between you and her. But I wanted you to know the truth." We ended the call, and I went back to my molding. Whatever happened at that bachelorette party was not my concern, or so I thought. Around midnight, when I was home and getting ready to call a night, my phone rang again. Same number. I answered, "Yes." Lauren said, "It is me again. You need to know what happened tonight." I said, "No, I do not." She said, "Yes, you do. Because it is about you." Something in her tone made me pause. I asked, "What do you mean?" She said, "Can I come talk to you? I am right outside." I walked to the front window and peeked through the blinds. Sure enough, there was a car idling in my driveway with the headlights off. For a second, I considered pretending I was not home. Then curiosity won. I opened the door. Lauren was younger than I expected, maybe 25, with an open, earnest face and tired eyes. She looked like she had been crying. She clutched her phone in one hand and her purse in the other. I said, "You want to come in and explain why you were on my porch at midnight?" She nodded and stepped inside. I gestured toward the living room. "Have a seat." She sat on the edge of the couch cushion, like she was not sure she was welcome yet. I asked, "Can I get you some water or coffee?" She said, "Water would be good." I brought her a glass, then sat in the chair across from her. I said, "Start from the beginning." She took a deep breath. She said quietly, "Reggie, this is going to sound strange, but I think I've been in love with you for 2 years." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to process that statement. She added quickly, "I know how that sounds. I'm not here to be messy. Please just let me explain." I nodded slowly. "Go ahead." She said, "I met you 2 years ago at Keisha's birthday party. You probably do not remember, but we talked for like 20 minutes about that bookshelf you built for her apartment." I did remember. She had asked thoughtful questions about wood grain and joinery techniques, the kind of questions people rarely asked. She said, "You explained how you chose the wood to match her existing furniture, how you reinforced the joints so it would last decades. You cared about doing it right, not just getting it done." Lauren looked down at her hands. "Keisha spent that whole party complaining to us that you were late because you stopped to help some elderly woman change her tire on the side of the road." I said, "That was a woman named Miss Patterson. She was stranded on Highway 6 with her hazard lights on. It did not feel right to drive past." Lauren nodded. "See, you remember her name." Keisha was embarrassed that her boyfriend was the kind of man who stopped for strangers. But I thought it was the most attractive thing I had ever heard. She continued, "From that night on, I paid attention. Whenever you showed up to group events, I watched how you treated people, how you remembered everyone's kids' names, how you always offered to help with heavy lifting or fixing things, how you listened when people talked instead of just waiting for your turn to speak." I shifted in my chair. "Lauren, where's this going?" She sat up straighter. "Tonight at the party, everything fell apart for Keisha. And it was because of you, but not the way you might think." She said, "We all showed up at the Magnolia Lounge around 8. There were 8 of us total, all Keisha's bridesmaids, plus a couple of her college friends. Keisha was acting like everything was perfect, showing off the ring, talking about how you two had worked through your little disagreement, and the wedding was definitely on. She kept using that phrase like it was all just a misunderstanding." Lauren shook her head. "But I knew the truth because you told me earlier, and I was getting angry watching her lie to everyone, making you look like the dramatic one who had some kind of meltdown." Her eyes flashed. "Around 10, after everyone had a few drinks, I cannot take it anymore. So I told them the actual story about what happened at dinner 2 weeks ago, about how she and her friends decided you were not impressive enough, about how you handled it with more class than she deserved." I raised an eyebrow. "How did you know all of that?" Lauren said, "Because Crystal, the one from the dinner, felt guilty and told me the whole story 3 days ago. She said they had been pushing Keisha for months to find someone with more money, someone in a suit instead of work boots, someone who could take her to country club events and impress her parents. And Keisha went along with it. Lauren said, she more than went along with it. Once I started talking tonight, the whole story came out. Turns out she has been complaining about you to those friends for months. Your job, your truck, the fact that you prefer watching football on Sunday to going to wine tastings, the way you like working with your hands instead of sitting in an office. She told them you were fine for now, but that she wanted to upgrade eventually. I felt that familiar anger stir again, steady but hot, and forced myself to keep my voice level. So what happened when you shared this at the party? Lauren almost smiled. Chaos. Complete chaos. Keisha tried to deny it at first, but Crystal was there, and she confirmed everything. Then 2 other friends admitted they had heard the same complaints for months. The rest of the bridesmaids just stared at her like they were seeing her for the first time. That is when it got interesting. She picked up her phone, tapped a few times, and said, "By the way, several of us thought you were amazing and have been wondering why Keisha seems so lukewarm about marrying you." She said, "My older sister Janelle, who is the maid of honor, actually said she had been hoping you would wise up and leave before the wedding." She said it right there at the table. Lauren scrolled through her phone and held it out. "Look at this. This is from our group text after everyone got home." I hesitated, then took the phone. I read through the messages. Multiple women talking about how attractive they found me, how they had noticed I was always respectful and helpful, how I seemed like husband material, while Keisha treated me like an accessory she was not sure about. One message from someone named Tanika made me laugh out loud despite myself. She had written, "Keisha is out of her mind. That man knows how to use his hands, has a steady job, and treats people with kindness. What more do you want?" I handed the phone back. So Keisha's friends turned on her. Lauren nodded. It was brutal. By 11, half the party had left. Keisha was crying in her cocktail, while the remaining friends told her she had made the biggest mistake of her life. She kept saying they were supposed to support her, not gang up on her. They told her support does not mean lying for her. Lauren set her phone down and looked at me. "But here's the thing that really matters." I said, "What?" She held my gaze. "I told them I was in love with you." The room felt very quiet. I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. I said softly, "You told them that tonight?" Lauren nodded. "I told the whole table that I had been watching Keisha take you for granted for 2 years. That if I had a man like you, I would never let him question whether he was good enough. I said you were the kind of man who builds things to last, including relationships." And Keisha was too shallow to recognize what she had. I asked, "How did Keisha react to that?" Lauren sighed. She lost it. Started yelling that I was a terrible friend, that I had no right to want her fiancé, that she had always been grateful for you. Lauren continued. Then Janelle asked her one simple question. "If you were so grateful, why have you spent 2 years complaining about him to us?" And Keisha could not answer, because she knew we all knew the truth. She had been keeping you around until something better came along. And then when something better did not show up, she figured she could mold you into whatever she wanted. I stood and walked to the window, looking out my dark driveway, the spot where I had handed her ring back. I said, "Lauren, why are you telling me all this?" She stood up too, but did not move closer. "Because Keisha is planning to show up here tomorrow morning with some grand gesture. She is convinced that if she explains herself the right way, apologizes enough, promises to change, you will take her back." I said firmly, "That is not happening." Lauren said, "I know. I told her that tonight. I told her men like you do not give second chances to women who make them feel small. But I also told her something else." I turned back toward her. "What was that?" She took a breath. "I told her that if she was foolish enough to let you go, I was smart enough to try to win you over." Lauren smoothed down her dress with nervous hands. "That is why I came here tonight. Not to talk you into forgiving her, but to ask if you might consider having dinner with me sometime. With someone who has spent 2 years watching you be a good man, and thinking Keisha was the luckiest woman alive." I looked at her for a long moment. She was pretty, yes, but more than that, she seemed sincere. She had paid attention to details most people missed. She had stood up for me in a room full of people. That meant something. I said, "What kind of dinner?" She smiled faintly. "The kind where I ask you about your work, because I'm actually interested. Where I do not check my phone every 5 minutes or complain that your truck does not have heated seats. The kind of dinner where I appreciate getting to spend time with someone who knows how to treat a woman right. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. Then another. Then 5 more in rapid succession. Lauren glanced at it and said, "That is probably Keisha. She's been texting everyone all night trying to figure out how to fix this." I picked up my phone, opened the first message, and read, "I know you are angry, but please let me explain everything. I can fix this. I love you." I deleted it without reading the rest. I put the phone face down and looked at Lauren. I said, "I appreciate you coming here tonight, and I appreciate your honesty. Let me think about the dinner thing, all right?" She nodded. "Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know the truth before she showed up tomorrow." As she headed toward the door, she said, "By the way, she is planning to be here at 8 in the morning with coffee and bagels from that place you like on 5th Street. I asked, "How do you know that?" Lauren said, "Because she announced it to everybody before the party broke up. She said if she showed up with your favorite food and a big enough apology, she could win you back." I opened the door for her. I said, "Well, she is going to be disappointed." Lauren gave a small, tired smile. "Good. You deserve someone who does not need to lose you to realize you are worth keeping." After she left, I sat alone in my living room for a long time, thinking about everything she had told me. Keisha thought she could undo 2 years of taking me for granted with coffee, bagels, and tears. She was about to learn that some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. I woke up at 6:30 Sunday morning, made coffee, and sat on my back porch watching the sunrise paint the sky pale orange over the roofs of the neighborhood. Lauren had been right about the timing. At exactly 8 o'clock, Keisha's white Honda pulled into my driveway. I watched through my kitchen window as she got out, carrying a bag from Johnson's Bakery and 2 cups of coffee in a cardboard carrier. She had dressed carefully in the blue sundress I had complimented her on last summer, her hair done in the style she knew I liked. Everything about her appearance was designed to remind me of better days. She knocked on my front door with the confidence of someone who expected to be let in. She called out, "I know you are home. Your truck is here, and I can smell coffee brewing." I finished reading the sports section of the newspaper, folded it neatly, and poured myself a second cup of coffee. She knocked for another 5 minutes, then started talking through the door. She said, "I brought your favorite everything bagels from Johnson's and that dark roast blend you like." Her voice had that practiced sweetness she used when she wanted something. I opened the door, but did not step aside to let her in. I said, "You can explain standing right there." She looked surprised that I had opened so quickly, like she had expected more resistance, and rehearsed a speech for someone who would not answer at first. She said, "Can I come in? I brought breakfast." I said, "I already ate. Say what you came to say." Her composure slipped just a little. Her smile faltered. This was not how she had pictured this going. She said, "Look, I know you heard about what happened at dinner, but you misunderstood what I was saying." I said, "I misunderstood you saying I was not impressive and that you should aim higher." She shifted the bag in her hands. "That is not. I mean, yes, but it came out wrong. I was just feeling pressure from my friends. You know they have these expectations about what kind of man I should be with." I leaned against the door frame. "And what kind of man is that?" She said, "Someone more socially connected. Someone who moves in the same circles as them." She rushed on, but I told them they were wrong. I told them you are amazing, just the way you are. I asked, "When did you tell them that? Before or after you called me a man you were settling for?" She swallowed. "After you left, I defended you completely. I swear." I shook my head slowly. "Interesting, because according to multiple people who were at your party last night, you've been complaining about me for months." The color drained from her face again. She said, "What party?" I said, "Your bachelorette party. The one you threw for a wedding that does not exist." She set the coffee and bag on my porch railing, her hands trembling slightly. "Who told you about that?" I said, "Does it matter? The point is, I know the truth about what you have been saying behind my back. So let us skip the part where you pretend this was all a big misunderstanding." She stared at me, eyes filling with tears. "Okay, fine. Maybe I did express some doubts to my friends, but that is normal in relationships, right? Everyone has doubts sometimes." I said, "Normal doubts are wondering if you're ready for marriage or how many children you want or whether you should move to another city. Normal doubts are not wondering if your partner is good enough for you." She said quickly, "I never said you were not good enough." I answered, "You said you were settling for me." You said that more than once to more than one person. I watched her as the reality of that settled over her. I continued, you kept me around as a placeholder until someone better came along. She said, that is not true. I said, then why did someone better not come along, Keisha? You are attractive. You have a good job. You move in those social circles your friends care so much about. Why are you here begging me to take you back instead of celebrating with your upgrade? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, realizing any answer would backfire. I said, I will tell you why. Because those impressive men your friends think you deserve are not interested in women who need constant validation and talk down about their partners behind their backs. They want women who appreciate what they have, not women who are always looking over the fence. She said, I do appreciate you. I appreciate everything you have done for me. I shook my head. No, you took advantage of everything I did for you. There's a difference. Now the tears came harder, rolling down her cheeks and streaking her mascara. I had seen this routine before, her go-to strategy when logic and charm stopped working. She said, please do not do this. We can work through this. I will talk to my friends. I will tell them how wrong they were. I will cut them off if I have to. I said, your friend are not the problem. You are. She said, I made a mistake. People make mistakes. I said, forgetting to pick up milk is a mistake. Leaving a dish in the sink overnight is a mistake. Spending 2 years undermining me to your friends, calling me unimpressive, planning to upgrade when you could. That is not a mistake. That is who you are. I stepped back toward my door. After 2 years together, you still do not respect me or value what I bring to your life. That is the truth. She said, I can change. I know I can be better. I asked, change into what? Someone who appreciates having a stable, loyal partner who shows up, pays bills, and build a future with you? You are 28 years old, Keisha. If you do not know how to value a good relationship by now, you're not going to suddenly figure it out just because you got caught. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. So that is it. 2 years together, and you're just going to throw it all away? I said, I'm not throwing anything away. You already did that when you decided I was not impressive enough. I am just acknowledging what you made clear. She whispered, but I love you. I said no. You loved having me around. You loved having someone reliable who took care of things, who made you feel secure while you looked around to see if something better might show up. That is not the same thing as loving me. She sank down onto my porch steps, crying harder now. What am I supposed to do? I already told everyone the wedding was back on. I cannot face them if you do not take me back. I said, you will figure it out. You are resourceful when you want to be. She said, my parents are going to be so disappointed. They really liked you. I answered, your parents should have taught you not to take good people for granted. She looked up with red, swollen eyes. Is there anything I can do? Anything at all? I said yes. You can learn from this. Next time you meet someone decent, do not spend 2 years complaining about them to your friends. Appreciate them from the beginning. She said, next time? What about us? I said, there is no us. There has not been for 2 weeks. I started to close the door, then stopped. Oh, and Keisha, return the ring to Harper & Sons Jewelers. They will give you store credit. You can put it towards something in your next relationship. She shook her head. I am not giving up the ring. It is the only thing I have left of you. I said, it is not yours to keep. We are not engaged. She said quickly, but you gave it to me as a promise that we would get married. That is still special. I said, that promise is broken. And legally, an engagement ring is a conditional gift. No marriage, no ring. I looked it up. Her tears shifted into anger. She said, you cannot make me return it. I said, no, but I can report it as theft if you do not. And I will. I smiled slightly, not out of cruelty, but out of finality. She glared at me, then finally muttered, fine. I will return your stupid ring. I said good. Have a nice life, Keisha. Then I stepped inside and locked the door behind me. She sat on my steps for another 20 minutes, alternately crying and furiously texting people. I saw the shadows of her pacing through the frosted glass near the top of the door. Finally, she gathered up the untouched coffee and bagels, walked back to her car, and drove away. I watched from the window until her taillights disappeared. Then I picked up my phone and called Lauren. When she answered, I said, how did you know she would be here at 8? Lauren said, lucky guess. How did it go? I said, Exactly like you predicted. Grand gesture, tears, promises to change. The whole performance. She asked, and you said no? I said, I said no. I hesitated and then added, Lauren, about that dinner invitation. Her voice warmed. Yes. I said, are you free next Saturday? I could almost hear her smile through the line. She said, I will make myself free. I said, good. Pick a place you actually want to go, not somewhere you think will impress me. She thought for a moment. How about that little Italian place on Emancipation Avenue? Rossini's. The one with the terrible parking, but amazing food. I said, perfect. 7 o'clock. She said softly, it is a date. The week passed faster than I expected. I spent it finishing the law office project, cutting, sanding, and installing molding that blended seamlessly into the building's original woodwork from the 1920s. I bid on 2 new jobs. I returned calls from clients. I worked late a few nights, partly because the projects needed it and partly because the steady rhythm of the work felt good. Every once in a while measuring or routing an edge, I would catch myself thinking about Saturday night, wondering what it would be like to sit across from Lauren without Keisha in the picture. Saturday evening, I arrived at Rossini's 5 minutes early and found Lauren already waiting at a corner table, a glass of water in front of her. She had chosen a simple black dress and had her hair pulled back in a way that showed off her smile and her eyes. No overdone makeup, no jewelry that cost more than my truck payment. Just a woman who looked comfortable in her own skin. I walked up and said, you clean up nicely. She smiled. So do you. Although I have to say, I like the work boots and jeans version too. It suits you. The conversation flowed easily, with none of the tension I had grown used to with Keisha, where I always felt like I was being evaluated. Lauren asked about the law office project, and I found myself talking about the challenges of matching existing woodwork, how the old building's walls were not perfectly square, how I had to adjust the angles by a degree or two to make everything line up. She listened with genuine interest, leaning in, asking follow-up questions that showed she was paying attention. She said, it is fascinating how much math and problem-solving goes into what you do. Most people think carpentry is just hammering nails. I said, most people do not pay attention to what goes into anything until it breaks. She laughed. That is true. I admitted. Keisha used to get this glazed look when I talked about work. After a while, I stopped telling her about projects because it felt like I was boring her. Lauren shook her head. That is her loss. I love hearing people talk about things they are passionate about. You light up when you describe a particularly challenging joint or figuring out how to make something both beautiful and functional. That is not boring. That is attractive. We talked about her work as a nurse at Harris County General Hospital, about the long shifts, the patients who stayed with her long after she went home, the small victories that made the hard days worth it. She described holding the hand of an elderly man who had no family in town while he went into surgery, and I could hear the care in her voice. We talked about our families, favorite books, and the small things that bring us peace. Me with a sharp chisel and a clean board. Her with a good playlist on her drive home after a 12-hour shift. Over dessert, she said, can I ask you something? I said, go ahead. She said, do you ever wonder if Keisha realizes what she lost? I thought about it. Honestly, I think she is starting to, but not because she misses me specifically. I think it is hitting her that decent men do not grow on trees, and that she burned her bridge with one over peer pressure and insecurity. Lauren nodded. Her friend did not really talking to her anymore, you know. I raised an eyebrow. Really? She said, Janelle called me yesterday. Apparently, Keisha has been texting everyone trying to get them to convince you to take her back. When that did not work, she started blaming them for giving her bad advice. Lauren shook her head. Classic Keisha. It is everyone's fault except hers. I asked, what did Janelle say? Lauren smiled. She told Keisha that her advice had always been to appreciate what she had while she had it, not to shop around for an upgrade. She told Keisha that if she was looking for someone to blame, she should start with a mirror. I leaned back, letting that sink in. A few months earlier, I might have felt a twist of satisfaction at hearing that. Now it just felt distant, like drama happening in a house I no longer lived in. After dinner, we took the long way back to our cars, walking 2 blocks through downtown. The evening air was comfortable, the city lights reflecting off windows and cars. We passed a street musician playing saxophone near a corner, and Lauren slowed for a moment to listen. She closed her eyes briefly, then smiled and said, "I love that sound. It makes the whole city feel alive." I found myself watching her expression more than listening to the music. When we reached her car, she said, "I had a really good time tonight." I said, "So did I. Do you want to do it again sometime?" Her smile widened. "Definitely." She hesitated, then said, "Can I tell you something that might sound strange?" I said, "Go for it." She said, "I spent 2 years watching Keisha take you for granted and thinking she was out of her mind. Now, sitting across from you at dinner, getting your full attention, and seeing how you treat someone when you are actually interested," she paused. "It is even better than I imagined." I raised an eyebrow. "Better how?" She said, "You ask questions and remember the answers. You hold doors but do not make a big deal about it. You are confident without being arrogant. You make a woman feel like she matters, not like she is an accessory to your life." I said, "That is how it should be." She nodded. "It is how it should be, but it is not how it usually is. Trust me, I have dated enough to know the difference." I walked her to her car, opened the driver's door, and said, "Drive safe. Text me when you get home." She said, "You want to check in?" I said, "I want to know you made it home. All right?" "There is a difference." She smiled. "See, that is exactly what I'm talking about." After she drove away, I sat in my truck for a few minutes, hands on the steering wheel, thinking about how completely different this felt from dating Keisha. There was no second-guessing myself, no walking on eggshells, no invisible standard I was trying to meet. Just two people enjoying each other's company. On the way home, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Lauren. "Home safe. Thank you for a perfect evening." I was typing a response when another message came through from an unknown number. It read, "I know you are seeing someone new. I hope you're happy. I hope she appreciates what I was too foolish to see." Keisha had gotten a new phone number to get around the block. I stared at the message for a moment, then deleted it and blocked that number too. I did not reply. The chapter with her was closed. 3 months later, I was installing custom cabinets in another kitchen renovation, this one for a couple who loved to cook and wanted every drawer and shelf plan down to the last spice jar. I was adjusting a cabinet door, making sure it closed flush, when Leon stopped by with news. He leaned on the island and said, "You hear about Keisha?" I said no. "What about her?" He said she got engaged. I looked up from the hinge. "Good for her." He said, "Some guy she met at her company's holiday party. He works in finance, drives a BMW, has season tickets to the symphony. The whole package." I tightened the last screw and stepped back to check my work. The cabinet doors hung perfectly, no gaps, no misalignment. I said, "Sounds like exactly what she was looking for." Leon studied my face. "You were really okay with that?" I closed the cabinet and wiped my hands on a rag. "Leon, I am dating a woman who appreciates me. My business is busier than it has ever been. I sleep well at night, knowing I made the right decision. Why would I not be okay?" He shrugged. "Just checking. I wanted to make sure there are no regrets." I said, "The only regret I have is waiting 2 years to find out who she actually was." 6 months after that, Lauren and I were in my house on a Saturday afternoon, painting the spare bedroom that was becoming her home office as she moved in. We had taken our time, built something solid, made sure we were compatible in all the ways that matter before combining spaces and lives. She was rolling paint onto the wall while I cut in along the trim. She said, "Did I tell you Keisha sent me a friend request on social media?" I said no. "When?" She said, "Last week." She dipped the roller into the tray and added, "I did not accept it, obviously." I said, curious why she tried to connect. Lauren said, "Not that curious. I heard through the grapevine that Mr. Finance is not working out the way she thought. Apparently, he is generous but controlling. He expects certain things in return for his lifestyle. And Keisha is not adjusting well to being someone's arm candy instead of their priority." I dipped my brush in the paint and said, "Some people have to learn lessons the hard way." Lauren said, "Some people never learn them at all." She smiled, then added, "But I am grateful she was too short-sighted to recognize what she had. Her loss, my gain." That evening, after we finished painting and cleaned up the supplies, we made dinner together in my kitchen, grilled chicken, vegetables, and cornbread. Lauren moved around the space like she had always belonged there, opening the right drawers without asking, teasing me about how neatly my spices were organized. At one point, She glanced over at the empty spot on the counter where Keisha's ring box used to sit before I returned it, and said, "I'm glad you knew your worth." I wiped my hands on a towel and said, "So am I." She stepped closer, put a hand on my chest, and said, "Good, because I plan to spend a very long time showing you just how right you were." We ate at the small table by the window, talking about nothing and everything. A new show she liked, a client of mine who wanted a table made from reclaimed wood, a vacation we might take in a year or two to New Orleans or maybe Atlanta. The ring box spot stayed empty, but it did not feel like something was missing. It felt like I had cleared space. Space for something built on mutual respect, steady care, and real appreciation. Space for a relationship where I did not have to wonder if I was impressive enough, because the person sitting across from me already knew I was enough exactly as I was. Later that night, as we washed dishes side by side, Lauren bumped her shoulder lightly against mine and said, "You know, I still think about that first conversation we had about that bookshelf 2 years ago." I smiled. "The one where you asked me more questions about wood grain than anyone ever had." She laughed. "Yes, I remember thinking, if Keisha does not want him, I hope the universe gives me a chance." I said, "Looks like the universe did its job." She dried a plate and said, "So did you. You walked away when you realized you were not being valued." I thought about that for a moment and nodded. Sometimes the most important thing you build is the life you are willing to walk away from so you can make room for a better one. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.